In this story, I board a cruise ship. I'm Joanne Green. For decades, my image of a cruise featured loud, gluttonous fressers. That's Yiddish for people who stuff their faces with abandon at the all-you-can-eat buffet. I envisioned tiny, airless rooms with, at best, a porthole. Smoke-filled casinos with spilled drinks due to sea turbulence, and long lines of parents with screaming children waiting to board and disembark at every port. Unappealing? You think? But then in the 1990s, we bought a timeshare that came with the free Royal Caribbean cruise for two. The Inside Passage of Alaska, we agreed, would be our destination. Hoping an Alaskan cruise would attract nature lovers and not be the cruise of choice for dedicated party animals, we signed up for a week-long adventure, starting and ending in Vancouver, British Columbia, that would include stops in Juno, Sitka, and Ketchikan. Ever the optimist, I focused on not having to unpack and repack every couple of days, a big plus, and on the fact that the ship we'd chosen featured a spa area with healthy food choices, exercise opportunities, and options for pampering. We reserved an upgraded cabin with a door leading out to a small private deck. Our bases were covered. Eyeing our fellow travelers as we boarded the floating city that would be our home for a week, our minds began to settle. There were people who looked enough like us, smiling, chatting, anticipating a good time. When asked on the guest form if we were celebrating anything that week, we shared that it was our wedding anniversary, figuring telling them might mean a bottle of champagne or some chocolate-covered strawberries. What we didn't anticipate was that it would peg us for participation in the very wed and newlywed game 2 nights later. What the heck, we thought when invited to be on stage to compete against other couples. Then they plied us with margaritas. Oh boy. Joined at the hip and hardly shy in front of a crowd, we answered their outrageous questions, winning nearly every round. The competition wasn't stiff, of course, and we were letting loose. And then they asked the final question. What is something your spouse continues to do that you find really annoying? How should I answer this, I wondered. The first thing that popped into my mind is how Fred disappears, quite suddenly. When I say he gets lost, he tells me that he knew exactly where he was the whole time. We'll be walking down a street together, for instance, and I turn to say something to him and he's not there. Could have been a store that wooed him in. More likely he stopped to take a photograph and either forgot to tell me or mentioned that he was doing so in a voice that I couldn't hear. I have a pet peeve, I said to the game show host, convinced that none of the other spouses would share my answer. My husband sometimes disappears. We'll be together at an event or walking somewhere, and at that precise moment, Fred left the stage. The audience went wild. I had to admit that he stole the show. But that wasn't the end of the game. 2 days later, people all over the ship were recognizing us. Weren't you the couple from the newlywed game? You were so funny. We nodded and smiled awkwardly. Back in our room, we turned on the television, and there we were, a bit tipsy, sharing oddly compromising secrets on the television show no one mentioned they were producing of our very wed and newlywed game. They were running it over and over again, 24 hours a day, in every room on the ship. We tried to be incognito, eating our meals in the spa section, keeping to ourselves as best we could, but it was not to be. Unwittingly, we'd gained our 10 minutes of fame on a cruise ship named, what was it? Legend of the Sea? Splendor of the Sea? Splendor in the Grass? Chicken of the Sea? I appreciate you listening to my podcast, and I hope you tell your friends. Also, let me know what you think. Any ideas? I'm happy to listen. If you haven't yet checked out my book, By Accident, A Memoir of Letting Go, you can order it at your local bookstore. It's distributed by Simon & Schuster, or you can order it on Amazon as an ebook, a paperback, or an audiobook.